my reflection on my trip to Malaysia. A visual essay. They say, every story has a beginning and an end. This is the story of my trip to Malaysia. I had not taken a trip like this in years. The price I paid was that my thinking, my mind, and my brain all became rusty. The mere thought of long flights, cramped airplane seats, and getting away from my daily routine was enough to make me abandon the idea in a flash. To me, the thought of travel is no longer an adventure that might be enjoyable. On the contrary, it has become a source of anxiety, an anxiety to be avoided at all costs. It became a kind of imaginary boogeyman that I ignored or ran away from confronting. What bothered me wasn't the imaginary fear itself, but how I had allowed this imaginary boogeyman to control my thoughts and my life. Throughout my later years, what I feared most was the idea of spending my old age sitting in a rocking chair, with nothing to do, nothing to look forward to. That thought was terrifying, and here I was doing exactly what I had vowed to myself a long time ago, never to do it. Planning the trip to Malaysia wasn't driven by enthusiasm. For me, it was about confronting my stagnant thinking and facing this imaginary boogeyman. It was also about fighting the habits that had grown and turned into shackles and chains. The goal of the trip was to deal with my stagnant thinking more than the enjoyment of the journey itself, though I was sure I was going to enjoy it. Throughout my earlier years, I loved traveling, whether by land or plane. I always loved the meditative sound of jet engines, and I still do. You know, that calming, soothing hum, that sound, which I always listen to calm my anxiety when it flares up. That's why this trip was my way of breaking free from this stagnation. It took me several years to reach this point of stagnation, but I finally succeeded in breaking free through this trip. So, I invite you to relax and enjoy the journey with me. Welcome to Malaysia. Putting a date on the calendar was easy. Deciding what this trip should mean was harder. I knew one thing for sure. I didn't want to leave one concrete jungle only to land in another and call it change. I didn't want the same life with a different skyline. This trip was not about tourism. In fact, I wanted to stay away from touristy places. Too much of it feels artificial. And it was not about checking places off a list. It was about creating space, creating peace, living with serenity. For my mind and heart, it was about quiet. I wanted something more natural, less human-constructed. I wanted to live in nature as it is meant to be. For weeks before the trip, I kept asking myself what I was really running from and what I was actually looking for. When the purpose became clear, the dates on the calendar stopped being just markers. They became a commitment, a vision. Week 1 was deliberate. I chose to stay in the middle of nowhere, surrounded by trees. I did not want to land somewhere by accident. If this trip was about reconnecting with nature, then the first week had to reflect that. The Chateau Spa and Wellness Resort promised exactly that. I worked with ChatGPT on this one. We went back and forth for hours, studying maps, elevation, distance from the city, access to green space. I was not searching for luxury. I was searching for alignment with the purpose of the trip. I wanted cooler air, silence, trees instead of concrete towers. When we finally chose the chateau, something settled inside me. The trip stopped feeling abstract. It became real. With that decision, the excitement quietly began to build. The boogeyman started to fade. Goodbye, fear. Hello, peace. The real shift did not happen at the airport. It happened during my ride from the airport to the chateau. As we left the airport and entered Kuala Lumpur, I kept looking at the towers and thinking, this feels familiar. Glass, steel, concrete, highways, just another city. I wasn't worried though because I knew where I was heading, but I kept watching, observing. Slowly, concrete began to thin. Traffic softened. Green started to appear between structures, then more green, then hills. And without noticing the exact moment, it happened. The city gave way to nature. By the time we reached the mountains, It no longer had the feeling of a city. I am now one with nature. I felt elated. Then it happened. I arrived. There it is, in its full glory, the chateau, exactly the way it was promised to be. It looked like a castle and was shaped like a castle. Even the taxi driver was impressed. He said he had never seen it before. I was exhausted from the journey, 24 hours of travel time, so my emotions were a bit dulled. Now, as I look back at it, I can't even remember what exactly I was feeling. But the excitement was still there, just tuned down. I remember that I wasn't carrying my expectations with me about the place. Only the simple expectation of being surrounded by nature, being one with nature. That's all what mattered to me, and the relief that the long travel is finally over. My daily routine became one with nature, as if we were united in a quiet, binding love. In the wee hours of the morning, I would open the curtain and simply feast my eyes on the view, romancing Mother Nature, my beloved Gaia. My daily routine was quite simple. It included a 6-minute walk to the Colmar Resort next door to buy coffee. It was cheaper there. Then another 6-minute walk back to the chateau. 2 birds with 1 stone. A morning exercise and a cup of coffee. Once back, I would sit by the pool with my laptop, my writing pad, and of course my coffee, and go about my day much like I did back home. The difference was not in the work itself. It was in the surroundings. Here, I was wrapped in nature. Surprisingly, it didn't rain much while I was there, but the one time it did, it came down in a heavy pour. I found myself hypnotized by it. The sound of rain striking the surface, the smell rising from the earth, the quiet beauty of it all. Every sense felt awake. The birds disappeared, and everything went still. And when the rain finally stopped, they returned, filling the air again. That was how I knew the storm had passed. Leaving the chateau felt heavy, a quiet sadness for what I was leaving behind, mixed with a cautious curiosity about what came next. The silence had done its job. The elevation, the rain, the isolation. I had arrived restless, and now I am leaving steady. But living inside that beauty had a price, and by the end of the week, I was feeling it. Laundry had become a problem I couldn't ignore. The resort's laundry service was unreasonably expensive. The alternative was hiring a taxi for a round trip to a laundromat in Hentang Highlands, over $100 each way. For 1 week, with enough clothes to last, you can manage. Beyond that, it becomes unsustainable. And groceries were no different. There was no real store nearby. Only 7-Eleven at the Colmar Resort, with no vegetables, no fruits, no real food. Only sugary junk food, and the reasonably priced morning coffee which I bought every morning on my total 12-minute walk. I was eating 1 meal a day at the resort restaurant, which was fine, but it wasn't freedom. It was dependency dressed up in beautiful surroundings. A person cannot live inside a fortress forever. At least, I could not. The move to Resorts World Awana was intentional. I wanted to test whether immersion and convenience could genuinely coexist, not just on a map, but in the texture of real daily life. The chateau had given me something profound, but it had also shown me clearly that nature without infrastructure has its limits. I love immersion, but I also needed to do my laundry without it becoming an expedition. On paper, Awana looked like the answer, still elevated, still surrounded by green, but closer to laundromats, grocery stores, food that felt more familiar. The friction of daily logistics would ease. The moment I arrived, I felt the shift. More people, families, conferences, a shuttle running on a loop, movement layered over movement. The forest was still there. Kind of there. I could see it from my window, but it was no longer wrapping around me. It had become a backdrop, a view, not an embrace like it was at the chateau. I found a laundromat. I did my laundry. That problem, at least, was solved. But the grocery situation was another story. I took the shuttle to the outlet mall, hoping to find real food, vegetables, basics, things I could work with. The shelves were stacked with junk snacks and sugary drinks. I walked the aisles slowly, looking for something familiar, and left with almost nothing. For dinner, I relied on a Turkish restaurant at the outlets. The only option that suited my diet, reached by shuttle, eating alone. It was pleasant enough. But it wasn't independence. It was just a more manageable version of the same dependency. That was the real discovery. Convenience brings infrastructure. Infrastructure brings people. People change the atmosphere. Not negatively, just inevitably. The quiet that had healed me at the chateau was now thinner, still present, but diluted, like a song playing in another room. Balance is harder than it looks from a distance. I was not disappointed. I was informed. Awana showed me what balance looks like from the outside and what it actually feels like to live inside it. The logistical friction eased, yes, but the immersion softened in equal measure. One always bends toward the other. What surprised me most was how clearly I could see myself through all of it. I was no longer reacting. I was observing. I was choosing. The anxiety that had once kept me locked in my apartment back home for years, the imaginary boogeyman I had come all this way to confront, were gone. Not suppressed, simply gone. At the chateau, I had been breaking chains. Here at Awana, I was simply choosing. And that difference, quiet as it sounds, was everything. By the end of week 2, I could feel something tightening inside me. I had lived immersion. I had tested convenience. I had tried to hold both at the same time. Slowly, the illusion that this is possible began to crack. I did not want that to be true. Still don't. The chateau gave me healing, but it created logistical friction. Resort Awana eased the logistics, but diluted the embrace, which was the fundamental purpose of my trip. I kept thinking there must be a version of this where both could coexist somewhere. A place where I can wake up to forest, walk to a proper grocery store, do my laundry without planning a small expedition, and eat without depending on a shuttle schedule. Then, I learned something about myself. Dependence for me scratches at something deeper, chips away at my peace. It turns the environment, no matter how beautiful, into an opponent that is hard to tame. For me, a kitchen is not really about cooking. It is about control over my choices. Without it, I feel like I am a guest in my own world, a guest waiting for the host to serve him meals. So I made a difficult decision I did not fully like. I began searching for a service department with a fully equipped kitchen. Sadly, the only real options I could find were in Kuala Lumpur. That meant stepping away from the hills, from the trees, from the cool, quiet embrace I had come all this way to live in. Felt like surrender, felt like defeat, but it was a move I had to make to salvage something essential. I was not running back to the city because I loved the city. Far from it. I was choosing infrastructure because I needed to reclaim my autonomy, even if it meant giving up nature. I felt like I am betraying my beloved Gaia, leaving her for my own self-interest. Kuala Lumpur gave me my kitchen. It gave me grocery stores. It gave me the ability to prepare my own food. It helped me restore something I had missed while living with Gaia. But moving to Kuala Lumpur meant saying goodbye to the deep immersion that had healed me in week 1. And I am still not fully at peace with that. What I discovered is not that balance is impossible. It is that balance refuses to sit still. It shifts. It demands adjustment, especially with my rigid attitude toward what is possible and what is not. It demands for trade-offs I am still stubbornly resisting. I am still resisting the idea that I cannot have both in the same place at the same time the way I had imagined it. But I am no longer blind to it. This trip offered me a bit of clarity, and clarity, as I have learned, is not always comfortable. In the end, this journey was not simply about choosing nature over city, or city over nature, though that tension shaped much of it. It gave me something more important, a discovery about myself, a clearer understanding of what I can live with and what I cannot. It taught me that even beautiful environments can become a source of friction if they quietly erode autonomy. That understanding, even as I am still wrestling with it, is something I will have to carry into every decision for future trips. Thank you for watching.